Okay, let's try again. It's reasonably quiet again in my little forest cafe. Horde of kids here, I think, celebrating a birthday just behind the camera. But it's gone quiet, apart from the parrots. And they are parrots, actually, in the trees. I don't know how wild parrots came to be flying around the forest in Tel Aviv that I'm in, Bereshit Forest, which is basically the first words of Genesis. So Bereshit means in the beginning or Genesis, but that's where I am. I'm Brian of London. Hello, and I've got my culturally appropriated Italian coffee, and it is hot as hell here. Somewhere in the 30s, humidity up in the 70s or 80%, but life is good. All right, firstly, Tommy. And the Tommy event on Saturday, which is tomorrow, the 14th, 14 juillet. I wish everybody going has a great time. I hope that there's nothing that the press can jump on and call violent or, that's all counterproductive if that happens. So, I just join the other sane people saying, yeah, let's please keep it respectable. Good singing, good times, listen to some good speakers. Obviously, Geert Wilders is banned from coming to the country in effect. I mean, I love how our sneaky little, my former country's sneaky government manages to, without actually banning Geert Wilders from the country, they find the one way to stop him from coming, which is that they refuse to give him diplomatic protection, and he's obviously a high-value target, and they also refuse to allow even his own Dutch diplomatic protection to carry sidearms, because, a bunch of trained Dutch police are going to commit a massacre with their handguns in London. I mean, I cannot think of any reason why the British government would fear Dutch police carrying weapons in defence of Geert Wilders. There's no reason on earth. It's just they decided that was a soft way of keeping Geert Wilders away from a large gathering of people. That's Theresa May. Theresa May. She is your Prime Minister. Well done, Britain. Well done on her. Even after her unbelievable performance as Home Secretary, when she was the Home Secretary during almost the main time of the EDL, she blocked Robert Spencer, she blocked Pamela Geller, she blocked Michael Savage, I think, the radio guy. She wasn't there to block Geert Wilders the first time. I think that came before her time, but Geert Wilders overturned his ban on entering Britain with expensive barristers. Anyway, go to Tommy's event, the Free Tommy event. Also, big shout out to the Middle East Forum, which I believe is Daniel Pipes' organisation, which is, I've had my differences over the years with Daniel Pipes and his view on Islam. He once chided me a long time ago that my view of Islam was static. I think that was back in 2003 or 4, and that, Islam could moderate and change. Well, Islam hasn't done a lot of moderating or changing in the 10 or 15 years. And I did set up a Patreon. Yes, if you want to contribute to getting my lower teeth fixed, patreon.com/Brian of London. There it is. You can give as little as much as you want. So, yes. Anyway, Daniel Pipes, I've met him a few times. He took part in a very famous event, which you can look up on the YouTubes and the Googles, 2006 or 5. There was a huge debate in London at a massive hall, and it was him and Douglas Murray, one of Douglas Murray's first significant appearances, actually, debating Red Ken Livingstone, the communist, who at that time I think was the mayor. And Ken Livingstone picked this woman to be his co-debater called Salma Yaqub, who is an out-and-out Islamic extremist. I mean, she's a total radical Islamist, if you want to use that term, which I don't really like. And, George Galloway Respect Party type person. Total Sharia for Britain type thing. Anyway, she and the probably drunk Ken Livingstone were debating Douglas Murray and Daniel Pipes. And Douglas Murray and Daniel Pipes just wiped the floor. It's a fantastic debate. You can find it on the YouTubes if you search. I think it was called the Clash of Civilizations Conference. Anyway, It seems that Daniel Pipes' Middle East Forum has sponsored the last Tommy Robinson rally in London, and is paying for this one. And I'm flabbergasted, because that's just total mensch territory. I understand that Ezra Levant is also flying into London because he wants to cover the appeal, which is Tommy Robinson's appeal against the sentence has been brought forward now to the 18th, so that's the middle of next week. And the judge has changed, so instead of it being this Sir Brian Levson, who obviously made a fool of himself by agreeing to be an appeal judge and having previously gone on the BBC saying Tommy's guilty as sin and an example of how the behaviour nobody should replicate. Anyway, he's off, and in his place, his boss, the highest judge of the land, the Lord Chief Justice. I mean, little Tommy Robinson, guy I've known for all these years, I am just flabbergasted that his imprisonment and now his appeal has risen to the point where the highest judge in Britain is going to hear his appeal. Anyway, the thing I wanted to finish with was this Faroe Islands thing that so I was looking at the BBC website, I can't remember why, and I see this sort of very nice, soft, fluffy piece about travel, and it's about the Faroe Islands wanting to preserve their ancient language, and it tells the story of the Faroe Islands. And basically, when you realise this, that the Faroe Islands and Iceland are kind of spun out of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, basically Nordic and Finland, Nordic people who settled there. But then they developed their own national identity, specific to the Faroe Islands. And they had their own national language, which contains multiple different names for various intricate parts of small fishing boats, which they used to survive, and all the tools it took to survive. Basically, an indigenous culture built around fishing and whatever agriculture they can manage to do up there in the far northern North Atlantic. And they were eventually taken over by the Danes, conquered by Denmark, and turned into basically a colony of Denmark. And the Danes, of course, and this is something that colonials do all the time, the colonials tried to suppress the Faroe Islands language. They banned it, they didn't want it spoken in church, and it was a spoken language. It wasn't really a written language. And this is just such a typical story of colonialism. That's the story of Israel. You know, Arabic comes in. Arabic is the language that gets spoken and pushes out all other language. Same with the Copts in Egypt, the Kurds, all across everywhere, you know, Zoroastrians and so on. All the cultures that came before the Arabs were squished by Arab invasion, Arab Muslim invasion, because Islam and the Arabs are one of the greatest colonizing forces the world's ever seen. And of course, Islam gave rise also to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was also massively colonial, suppressed cultures, fought wars, murdered Armenians, all of that sort of stuff with a genocide. Yes, the Armenian genocide. And back to the Faroe Islands. So the BBC is telling this sweet story of the Faroe Islanders reclaiming their language. 200 or 300 years ago, they started writing it down and made a dictionary, and they sing songs with 12,000 verses to remember their history and so on. And it's a totally sweet story. You couldn't, and you don't exactly come away from this thinking that the Danes are the most hideous colonial occupiers in history, but they are. And, according to the Faroe Islands. And it just got me thinking that, of course, then they throw in at the end of this thing a reference to Catalonia. And the Catalans have got their language and stuff. They're also an indigenous identity within this colonial enterprise, which is called Spain today. But the best example in the entire world, of course, of the rebirth of an indigenous language and an indigenous people bringing back to life their own culture in their own land. I mean, it never quite died out in Israel, thank God, but it was certainly suppressed and down on its luck. And from the 1800s and so, Jews rebuilt Israel, and that's that. And they picked Hebrew, and there was a decision, but they picked Hebrew, which was a phenomenally important decision because, as Ryan Bellerose points out, that there are 5 components. I'll just say the 5 components again, as I said it last week, to indigenous identity. It's land, language, culture, blood, and spirituality or religion. And that language, because Hebrew picking Hebrew turns the whole country into a Jewish enterprise, and it damn well does. Of course, we have a large Arabic-speaking population here, and but that's a colonial language. Arabic. I hate when I get phone calls on this. Arabic was not invented here, and that's the way it is. Anyway, that's the end of and kind of the final point is that the BBC would never write a glowing piece about the revival of Hebrew in Israel. They would never see it that way. They're stuck thinking that the Arabs have some rights here, but they really don't. That they're just belligerent occupiers upset that we took back our place. Anyway, free Tommy. Have a good time at the event tomorrow if you're going. Keep it peaceful, everybody, and really looking forward to seeing the videos on Sunday and Saturday night.